Good evening. Today is January the 8th, 2021. Hope everybody's had a good day. I want to mention today to discuss a man was quite interesting, and his life was very had a great impact on various religious movements in America. His birth name was Timothy Drew. He was born on January the 8th, 1886, reportedly near Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And he took the name of Noble Drew Ali. He founded the Moorish Science Temple, the first predominantly African-American Islamic organization in America. Here's one picture of him, and another picture. These were all done during the 1920s. The Moorish Science Temple, Divine Constitution and Bylaws contains another picture of the prophet, as they called him. Pictures of some conventions of this organization. And there's the man we're talking about right there in the middle. You might ask how I ever got interested in him. Well, I've researched and written about a number of subjects over the years. Freemasonry and its relationship to other various religions, which is a long and complex subject, has been a subject of my research for many years. The relationship between Freemasonry to Christianity has been target of much media attention. Unfortunately, a lot of it negative. Maybe we'll deal with that some other time. But Freemasonry's also had various relations with Islam. The vast majority of lodges, one must be a believer in a supreme being in order to become a Mason. There's an exception to that in the Grand Orient of France, but most of the Masonic lodges throughout the world require believers to be a member of a supreme being. And there are Christian Masons, Jewish Masons, Muslim Masons, Hindu Masons, Buddhist Masons, etc., etc. But in the 1970s, when I was involved in research for my master's thesis at Baylor University, The Nation of Islam, Belief and Practice in Light of the American Constitutional Principle of Religious Liberty, when I was researching for my MA in Church State Studies, I read everything I could get my hands on the Nation of Islam, the so-called black Muslims. And I consulted a number of sources that indicated that the black Muslims were an offshoot of the Moorish Science Temple, and that the founder of the Moorish Science Temple, Noble Drew Ali, had been influenced by the ritual of the Masons and Shriners. And during the 1980s, I established a friendship with the late Joseph A. Walks Jr., founder and president of the Phylaxis Society, an organization established to promote research and writing on Prince Hall Freemasonry. Brother Walks described the Phylaxis Society as an organization for Prince Hall Freemasons who seek more light and who have light to impart. At the time, he was in the middle of his career as an administrative assistant at the U.S. Penitentiary at Leavenworth, and he obtained unpublished documents from inmates who had converted to the Moorish religion while incarcerated. He too was convinced of a strong Masonic influence. He asked me to write a masterpiece on the Moorish Science Temple. I happily complied with the request, and the product appeared in the first quarter 1985 issue of the Phylaxis magazine, and a couple of other editions have followed. I've revised the paper more than once over the years. Excuse me. It's been a busy day. I had a funeral today and had a lot going on. I wanted to do this video on January the 8th, but this time of day I started getting rather tired and sleepy, so just bear with me if you will. I do remember at the time when I was doing this research, I was living in Kaufman, which is not far from Dallas. I made trips to the Dallas Public Library and came across everything I could find there, which was only a limited amount. Arthur Huff Fawcett's book, Black Gods of the Metropolis, that was written in the 1940s in Philadelphia. It deals with the Moorish Science Temple and 4 other sects. And that was the foundation for many things that were written. Some later scholars, such as C. Eric Lincoln and Joseph Washington, their works would refer back to the work that Fawcett had done. And the same way with E.U.S. Anuda, his book on black nationalism. So in the 80s, I was doing some of the first new research on the Moors in decades. Since then, a lot more has been done by a lot of people. And with the advent of the internet, research has exploded. The last paper that I published in the Phylaxis, I believe it was in 2013, I spent time at the Broadwell Library, which is an outstanding research facility at Perkins School of Theology at SMU. I've never attended school there, but I have used their libraries a number of times over the years, and their SMU libraries are tremendous. But it appears the Moorish Science Temple was the first Islamic movement directed specifically to African Americans. And in Arthur Huff Fawcett's 1944 study, he said the black Muslims are directly descended from the Moorish Science Temple. Elijah Muhammad, Muslim leader, stresses economic and cultural independence of blacks. Malcolm X became Elijah's disciples while serving a jail sentence. The tenuous thread woven by Noble Drew Ali and long ago tiny missions in Detroit, Chicago, and Newark has penetrated the labyrinthine political maze. And on a couple of occasions, I had the pleasure of meeting and hear speak the late Dr. James Cone, pioneer in black theology, taught at Union Theological Seminary. In his book, Martin Malcolm in America, A Dream or Enactment, he says that although the Moorish Science Temple is still in existence, it was important mainly as a forerunner to the Nation of Islam. And so this movement is important. It still exists. Not as many people know about it, but it was started by this very interesting man, Timothy Drew. On the 8th of January of 1886, he was born in North Carolina, possibly near Winston-Salem. And according to some reports, his parents were ex-slaves and he was adopted by Cherokee Indians. There's a legend that he was descended from Bilal Muhammad, a slave who lived in Sapelo Island off the Georgia coast, who wrote an Arabic diary and demonstrated continuity with Islamic identity in 19th century America. Bilal Muhammad can be seen as the spiritual, if not the biological, grandfather of Noble Drew Ali. And there is certainly no question that in 1886 there were a lot of former slaves still alive. There wasn't as many, but there were quite a few still around in 1897 when Elijah Poole, who later became Elijah Muhammad, was born in Sandersville, Georgia. So, with these two Islamic leaders, this cannot be proven, but there is a very good possibility that they may have met former slaves in that part of the country in North Carolina and Georgia who had been or still were of the Islamic faith. And so a lot of details we're not sure of. But both men, certainly there was much that they could build their faith on. And his followers claimed that Noble Drew Ali spent time in Egypt and was taught much of the Egyptian mysteries. According to one account, he received the title Noble by passing a test of authenticity when he was shut inside of pyramids, successfully found his way out. None of these reports can be determined by sources external to the movement. Nevertheless, his followers believe he visited North Africa, received a commission from the King of Morocco to teach Islam in America. And as a young man, he moved to Newark, New Jersey, where he worked as a porter for the B&O Railroad. The Associated Press reported that he accompanied a Hindu fakir in circus shows. If this is true, he may develop skills in magic, which he later employed in the great Moorish drama, claiming to escape the bonds of several yards of rope as Jesus was bound in the Temple of Jerusalem. And he was very dissatisfied with Western Christianity and its tolerance for white supremacy. He began to study Eastern religions, and it's believed that in 1912 or 13 he converted to Islam due to the influence of Mufti Muhammad Sadiq, a missionary from India who brought hundreds of East Indians and Arabs and a substantial number of African Americans into the Ahmadiyya movement of Islam. The Ahmadiyya movement, by the way, is considered heretical by most Orthodox Muslims. The founder claimed messiahship, and one of the most central teachings of Islam is that Muhammad was the seal of the prophets, the last of the prophets, and after Muhammad there can be no more prophets. And so the Moorish Science Temple, in claiming Noble Drew Ali as a prophet, and the Nation of Islam claiming Elijah Muhammad as a prophet, certainly puts both of them outside of Orthodox Islam. But there were a lot of different movements going on at that time. And Timothy Drew, a.k.a. Noble Drew Ali, produced a book called The Holy Quran of the Moorish Science Temple, also called the Seven Circle Quran. It has little resemblance to the regular Holy Quran. In fact, Allah is mentioned several times. Muhammad's only mentioned a couple of times, and there's more in there about Jesus than there is about Muhammad. But he was impressed by the theosophical work of Levi H. Dolan, the Aquarian Gospel of Jesus the Christ. In his 19 chapters, he copies from the Aquarian Gospel, doing some changing of the terminology. Levi Dolan, by the way, was a white Christian minister who developed an interest in comparative religion and theosophy. He incorporated beliefs in the universality of all religions, the mystical nature of the East, and the possibility of spiritual mastery of higher worlds. There was a lot of interest in the East, a fascination with it. In fact, I have a book How the Arabian Nights, it's called How the Arabian Nights Inspired the American Dream from 1790 to 1935. You see, there's a picture of a Shriner on the cover. And this book has a great deal in here about various Eastern movements and the influence of Islam, playing Eastern. And there are several pages devoted to the Moorish Science Temple. Discusses black spiritualism rooted in centuries of African American magical practices. Black spiritualists evoke the consumers-oriented tale, much like the Shriners, cozy corner builders, and theater people, and had for decades. And so there was a lot of stuff of that nature going on at that time in history. Both the Moorish Science Temple and the Nation of Islam were important for laying the groundwork in associating race pride and activism with Easternized self-preservation, and also with Islam. And when it comes down to stuff like that, orthodoxy really doesn't matter. The book The Aquarian Gospel of Levi Dolan was a theosophical work, and there's a Rosicrucian text under the I grant. Both of those were used by Noble Drew Ali in writing his Holy Quran of the Moorish Science Temple. And there's some evidence he was also influenced by Sufism, the mystical variety of Islam, another subject that to me is very fascinating. And there are some undocumented claims that his parents were taught by the master adept Jamal ad-Din al-Afghani, a native of Afghanistan whose life has been described as a mysterious odyssey that led from India to America. So there were plenty of resources out there at that time in history. A lot of people were starting movements, which people have done throughout history. And he was one who did and had some success. And the Masonic influence is very profound. The in Circle 7 Quran, the big thing in the Moorish Science Temple is the issue of nationality. They say people need to know their nationality. Noble Drew Ali made a big deal about rejecting such terms as Negro and Black, which imply death, Colored, which means something painted, and Ethiopian, which implies division. I've always had a problem with that because Ethiopia is a nationality, but I guess that's beside the point. He called upon his hearers to call themselves Asiatics, Moors, and Moorish Americans. It's a very true statement, though. You get a map or an atlas, you're not going to find any country on earth called Black. And one Moorish leader wrote me that there was a Negro river in South America that it was called that because it contained black water. And someone asked me, I told them about that, said, can you drink it? And I said, I really don't know. I'm not sure where in South America that's found. But Drew Ali started temples various places. Then in 1925, he appeared on the south side of Chicago. His banner was the Moorish star and crescent in a field of red. He wore a flaming red fez, similar to those worn by the Turks. He required each of his followers to adopt as part of their name either Bey, B-E-Y, or El, E-L. He required that all male followers wear a red fez and all female followers wear a turban. Reportedly at secret meetings, the Bays wore red fezes while the Eels wore green fezes. It was also in 1925 that he allegedly made a trip to Washington, D.C. for an audience with President Calvin Coolidge. Reportedly, he asked the president for the right to call upon his people and teach the principles of their ancient forefathers, Islam. And the president is reported to have said it would be as difficult to get Negroes to accept Islam as to fit a horse with a pair of pants. And back on December 18th, I discussed about celestial phenomena in the skies over Chicago, December 18th, 1925, with the Islamic Star and Crescent. And they made a big deal about that. They said that was a sign from Allah. Not only that the religion of Islam would arise in the West, but the day of arrival of the Asiatic and the destruction of European civilization had arrived. And by 1928, Noble Drew Ali had established 17 temples in 15 states, with the largest and most influential in Chicago. From the Chicago office, his Moorish Manufacturing Corporation produced and sold a number of products derived from the rich pharmacopoeia of African American folk medicine, including old Moorish healing oil, Moorish purifier bath compound, and Moorish herb tea for human ailments. And there's some theories that he may have borrowed from Southern Conjure, New Thought, and Seventh-day Adventists. I'm not sure how all that fits together, but there's some possibility there. And speaking of Seventh-day Adventists, I looked at a video a while back. It is known for a fact that Malcolm X was his mother, Louise Little, after the death of her husband, Earl Little, a Baptist preacher, became a member of the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Lansing, Michigan. And these white Adventists came to her home and taught her their doctrine, and she and her children went to their church and were treated very well. Unfortunately, there's no baptismal records from the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Lansing, Michigan during this time, so there's no way to know if Malcolm himself was ever baptized into the Seventh-day Adventist Church. That'd be interesting to find out what, if any, influence the Adventists might have had on him. But it appears that Noble Drew Ali like so many others in history, was a cut and paste man, and he picked up a lot of information from different sources, and whatever he could use, he used it. And there were a number of people who converted and joined the Moorish Science Temple. There were even a few prominent people that did. There was an African-American politician from Chicago who got elected to Congress. His name was Oscar de Priest, and some sources claim that he was a member of the Moorish Science Temple. although if he wasn't actually a member, he certainly had contact with him and he was a friend of the movement. There could be no question about that. The early 1929 Temple records indicate that membership had reached 15,000. At the time, the main mosque and national headquarters was at Unity Hall, a building located at 3640 Indiana Avenue in Chicago, purchased by philanthropist Julian Rosenwald for his butler Claude Green, who held the office of sheikh and business manager in the Moorish Science Temple. And there soon developed a major conflict within the movement. They were getting more money and more power, and typically when that happens, power corrupts, as Lord Acton says, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And people fight over money, they fight over power, they fight over a lot of things. But Claude Green declared himself the Grand Sheikh and was stabbed to death at his office. Drew Ali was not in Chicago at the time of the stabbing. Nevertheless, upon his return, he was arrested and charged with murder. A Moor named Small Bay told police the governors and sheikhs of some large temples had sided with Green in order to draw Ali and his supporters out of Unity Hall. Subsequent reports indicated that Drew Ali objected to Green's using the prophetic office to market charms and nostrums. This resulted in a breach in Drew Ali's positive relationship with a number of newspapers, including the Chicago Defender, and which denounced him as a common Southern migrant and a fraud. By the early 1929 Temple records, again indicated it was growing. And these newspapers spoke well of him, but then later they changed. They claimed that investigators were about to charge him with statutory rape in violation of the Mann Act after a 14-year-old girl claimed that she was carrying his child. Allegedly, he taught Moorish women that it was holy to have their daughters receive the affections of Muhammad's representative here on earth. Anybody who studied the Nation of Islam knows that one of the major causes of a rift between Elijah Muhammad and Malcolm X was when a number of Elijah's secretaries bought paternity suits against him. Drew Ali was further charged with collecting $35,000 by duping his followers with religious hokum in 1928. He and his associates were charged with using representations of Morocco to cloak fakery, fraud, and immorality. Noble Drew Ali was later released on bond and fled under mysterious circumstances, where he died on the 20th of July, 1929. Some said that he died as a result of the third degree received from Chicago police. Others blamed beatings at the hands of his distant followers. And while there were rumors that he suffered from tuberculosis, one of his disciples told a reporter, "The prophet was not ill. His work was done. He laid his head upon the lap of one of his followers and passed out." The Chicago Defender sent a photographer to cover the funeral procession of Moors and Fezes, in turbans, as they marched through the south side of Chicago, carrying the coffin of their prophet. He was buried in Burr Oak Cemetery. Hold on a second. Excuse me, please. Sneezes, unfortunately, involuntary. But the movement has survived for over 100 years. And there were some splits after he died. One faction, led by this man right here, John Gibbons Eel. He served as the prophet's chauffeur. On the 7th of August, 1929, while working on Drew Ali's automobile, John Gibbons Eel fainted. Reportedly, when his eyes were examined, he had the sign of the star and crescent in his eyes. They knew right then he was the prophet reincarnated. And that's the name he used from the rest of his life. On the 19th of September, 1929, he announced this at Pythian Hall. He took the name Noble Drew Ali Reincarnated. He taught in Chicago until the 21st of October, 1945, at which time he passed out of his form. But he was not the only claimant in reincarnation. And while Drew Ali was out on bail, he appointed David Ford Hill, a new member of the Chicago Temple, as Sheikh, and soon promoted him to Grand Sheikh. Following Drew Ali's death, Ford Hill claimed that the prophet had left him in charge and thus declared himself another reincarnation. In November 1929, he relocated from Chicago to Detroit, taking a number of devotees with him. He used the name of Wallace D. Farrard and W. Farrard Muhammad. And he renamed his faction the Allah Temple of Islam, and later the Lost Foundation of Islam in the West. And from this evolved into what became known as the Black Muslims. Elijah Poole had joined the Moors and heard a lecture by Noble Drew Ali in Detroit. And he became one of Farrard's most enthusiastic disciples. He became known as Elijah Muhammad and took over the leadership of the organization after Farrard's disappearance in 1934. W. Farrard was a mystery man. There's a lot of mysteries surrounding where he came from. There's a lot of stuff out there about that. He was very light-skinned, and there's some claim that he was of pure European stock. There's also claimed that he was from India or Pakistan or possibly New Zealand. Some say he was an Arab, some say he was a light-skinned black man from the South. We really don't know. And some claim that he later appeared as an imam following the death of Elijah Muhammad and the reorganization of the movement by his son Imam Wahidi Muhammad. And there's a lot of pictures made throughout the last 100 years of the Moors in their fezzes and costumes. Two Moorish leaders, Edward Mealy Eel and Charles Curtin Bay. Curtin Bay is wearing a shrine fez. And the Moors, for the most part, criticized the shrine fezzes as being disfigured. They wore a plain red fez with a black tassel, but no scimitar and crescent or anything else on it. And there's a story about a Shriner came to a meeting of the Moorish Science Temple wearing his fez. Noble Drew Ali walked up and removed the fez from his head, placed a Moorish fez. He said, "You don't need this anymore, now that I am your prophet." And so there's a man I know personally. I've had meetings with both at the Dallas County Jail and at the state prison in Huntsville. The convert to the Moorish Science Temple, Thomas Joe Millerell. He was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to death by lethal injection in Dallas in March of 1986. The Moors had held a convention at the Holiday Inn in Irving across from Texas Stadium in November of '85, and the following week a murder occurred and an armed robbery, which one person was killed, another person paralyzed, and Thomas Millerell was blamed for that and found guilty. And during the punishment phase of the trial, much was said about his membership of the Moorish Science Temple, which the prosecution described as a so-called religion and a heavily armed paramilitary group. And this occurred 1 month before the U.S. Supreme Court issued a landmark ruling that a prosecutor's peremptory strikes may not be used to exclude persons based on race. That was 1986, Batson versus Kentucky. And in 2003, the Supreme Court of the United States ruled that there had been racial bias in the jury selection in Thomas's case. And Eventually, when the case was tried again, or wasn't tried again, they worked out a plea bargain. He pleaded guilty to murder. They dropped capital murder. And the fact that he had not been a disciplinary problem in 20 years in prison, they had difficulty establishing a claim that he was a continuing threat to society. It's my understanding they've made a number of efforts to at parole, but they've been unsuccessful so far. But I carried on correspondence with Thomas and met him at the prison, and also met his wife Dorothy. And they have an adept chamber in which a lot of different things are taught. And you can see, that's the very term adept, has Masonic overtones. An adept is someone who's knowledgeable about a particular subject. And that's used in masonry and many other things. And the ancient Egyptian Arabic order of nobles of the mystic shrine, the Prince Hall Shriners, had been seen as a conduit through which Islam came to the attention of Noble Drew Ali. There's no question shrine membership grew into the 1920s when Noble Drew Ali was well placed to take advantage of the fraternal culture. I've written a great deal on this and don't have time to go into it all. One source spoke about the name Noble Drew Ali. Noble is a title given to all members of the Shriners upon initiation into the lodge. Drew is the past tense of the word draw, to take or pull out, to pull toward or after one. And Ali, the name of Caliph Ali, who supposedly instituted the Order of Shriners. There's, of course, a lot of problems with that story. Moors, like Shriners, are known for their colorful parades. The 1928 Moorish conclaves featured such a parade, which has been thus described: notwithstanding the chance for conflict, the police, in league with rank and file Moors, stepped out into the streets beside the Prophet, who had them climb into his convertible, with the Prophet waving to the crowds. Police and the turbaned and gowned Moorish Americans marched together through the south side for a dozen blocks. And there's many Masonic allusions in the Seven Circle Quran. Evidence indicates that Noble Lee was no flash in the pan, and the Moorish Science Temple is more than just a precursor to the Nation of Islam. The Masonically fringed fraternal organization transformed into an Islamic house of worship has played an important role in history and might possibly make important contributions to spirituality now and in the future. It was all started by this man, Timothy Drew, who was born 135 years ago today, and whose teachings inspired a number of different movements. So, hope I've given you some food for thought tonight. Have a good evening. Stay safe. God bless.